Welcome to the BigMikeFund Podcast, where you'll learn about advanced wealth building strategies from real estate investing to creating massive ROI and secured retirement profits. So pour yourself a cup of coffee, grab a notepad, and lean in, because Big Mike has got the mic. Starting now.
Welcome to the BigMikeFund Podcast. I'm the Big Mike Zlotnik, and today it is my pleasure and a privilege to welcome, should I call you Doctor or Dr. Axel or just Axel?
Whatever you like best.
I appreciate your flexibility. And he hails from sunny Spain. How are you, Doctor?
Mike, yeah, I'm good. Thank you. And thanks for having me.
So let me make the formal introduction. Dr. Meierhoefer, host of the Ideal Investor Show, is an Air Force vet, turned real estate investor using strategies like 1031 exchanges, turnkey investing, and more. Axel now owns multiple properties in different countries and states. Very interesting. Not just states or cities, different countries. You have some properties in Ohio, Idaho, Illinois, Florida, Belize, Panama, Spain, and more. He currently serves his clients as a mentor and value asset expert. You prepare folks for the age of abundance, and you live with your wonderful wife, Heidi, in Spain. Well, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you, Mike.
I hope I didn't butcher it up. I apologize. But tell us a little bit about you. What's been your journey? Where are you originally from? What country? Just for the record, I'm originally from Moldova, former USSR.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's very cool. By the way, we have beautiful wine and beautiful wife, so it's both true. So, yeah, my journey is actually quite unique, I think. I'm originally from Germany, was born in northern Germany. Had an uncle that was an executive at Lufthansa and kind of gave me the bug. I desperately wanted to fly. I never, when I was little, understood that he wasn't the pilot. I just knew that he was flying all the time with Lufthansa. So that's what got me wanting to get into aviation. So I basically wanted to fly for Lufthansa, but that was in the early 80s when the inflation was bad, economy was bad, so they just weren't hiring. And the question was, okay, if you still want to fly, what can you do? And first went to the Navy recruiting center, and they said, yeah, you can fly, but you first have to learn how to drive a boat, which I didn't want to do. And then they said, well, if you don't want to do that, then go to the Air Force. You don't need to do that there. And so I went to the Air Force. I did the whole application process, everything. And I made it through that. Went through pilot training in the United States, came back to Germany and started flying there. And then a few years in, I got to know that there is a flight test program for a new aircraft, which I applied for, and then enrolled and got to fly. And that kind of opened the door for me to participate in an exchange program that at age 32 brought me to the United States to fly for the US Air Force F-111s. And to make it short, when you fly military jets, there comes a point where the physical strain that you have on your body is just getting too much. So I had a contract that said, if I can't physically do it anymore, if the flight surgeon said, hey, you're reaching the end of the line, then I can decide if I want to stay in or want to retire. And I saw after 22 years, I decided to retire, and I was immediately recruited by a software company from California who gave me a green card and helped me with housing and all kinds of things. So that basically, instead of going back to Europe and back to Germany, we stayed in the US. And then the normal stuff happens. Daughter is in school there, is better in English than in German. I had a job, then I went to school to get a master's degree and ultimately a doctorate. And then I decided to open my own business, which the United States is really a great place to do that and gives the opportunity. And so in 2005, I started that. And as part of that, I started looking at where can I invest for some kind of security in retirement, because as Europeans, I don't know if Moldavians are that way too, but as a German, you always think like, okay, where is money going to come from if I ever retire? And so that was my thinking too when I started my own business and looked, and stocks weren't the great thing at the time. So I discovered real estate, started investing in real estate. And I'm somebody, that's why I also, as you said, have a podcast. I really like to talk to people about stuff that I'm interested in. So whenever somebody said, "Hey Axel, what are you doing, or what are you into, or what have you been working on or stuff," my answer almost always was, "Well, I'm looking at this deal, or I'm analyzing this, or I just got a house in this state or that state." And sooner or later, people were saying, "Well, can I do this too? Is this just for you, or is this, do you need to be special or whatever?" And so I kind of started getting into mentoring and coaching people. Then in 2015, turned it into a real second company that I opened. And ever since, I have, like, in a way, like a boutique shop, mentored people in how you can invest in residential real estate relatively far away from home, because I was living in Santa Barbara, really, really expensive. And I couldn't find any deal that made any sense, pencil out. So I discovered turnkey investing in different states in the US. Then I discovered investing internationally, and I've been doing it ever since. And I'm always saying, from a credibility perspective, there is something different when somebody tells you what you should do, or somebody can show you, here's exactly what I did, here are the properties, here's the process, here are all the relationships. So that's, I don't have hundreds or thousands of people at any given time. We're a relatively small boutique community, but I'm very proud to say rarely ever does anybody leave that initially started in the program, because we just kind of growing together. We're sharing part of our life journey, and I really love that.
That's a great story. I really, really enjoyed listening to you, how you went from Germany to the US under the military flying program, and it's just amazing. You had a great career. Sounds like 22 years, if I heard you correctly.
Yes,
which is long. Not that many people stay in the military that long. I know a number of pilots who served in military, in Air Force for a while, and then they go to civil aviation, go to Delta or United or one of these, Lufthansa, one of these big airlines. So it's kind of interesting how you spend your entire career in the military, and then you retired, and then you got into, you said, software company in California, and then you basically came to the same conclusion. I live in New York City. You can't invest for cash flow in these coastal markets. You get no cash flow. Right. So you discovered, I guess, turnkey properties. That's an amazing journey. And so tell a little bit about the community and your coaching. So I know you have a show called Ideal Investor Show, but what is your community called? How do you coach people, under what company? Just a couple more words on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the organization is called Ideal Wealth Grower. And I basically called it that because wealth is basically the anchor point that we are building individually, but also in a sense together. And then I had developed those two aspects. The first one is not really something I came up with. It's just the fundamentals of residential real estate investing. And the other one is the approach. So if you're okay with it, I can tell you what both mean and how they work and what is relevant about them, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Give us some quick commentary of how do you think about it? What do you like? Just curious.
Yeah, absolutely. So ideal of the Ideal Wealth Grower is basically to point out what are all the things that are relevant when you decide you want to join the community of residential real estate investors. Because what you're getting is I is for income, D is for depreciation. The government is basically saying your house is like a little engine that only runs so long so you can depreciate it. E is for equity, which means, anything that is basically being paid off, or your initial down payment, that's equity in the property, plus any increase in value. Then you have A for appreciation, which is a different form of equity. And then you have L for leverage, because one of the beautiful things that you can do, and why I actually got into it, is because I can take, like, let's say $40,000 and buy a $200,000 house. So that aspect is really important. Oftentimes people say to me, well, you will never make as much as you can make with the stock market. And I always say, okay, well, that's cool. Show me the stock that I can get $200,000 worth if I give you 50. And nobody has ever been able to show me that. So those are basically those different aspects of the ideal, and why we call it Ideal Grower is the other part. And that comes from my studies. I mentioned I went for a master's degree, and then I kind of always say I was talked into continue to go for a doctorate in leadership. And one of the components was, how do you engage with people who want to learn how to be a leader? I had a pretty good idea from my military time and from my time in the software company. And I found that coaching is a really important and helpful thing to do. And a guy that is very well respected, especially in the business community, is a guy by the name of John Whitmore. And he wrote a book called Performance Coaching. The idea was, how can employees improve their performance? And within that book, he describes something he calls the GROW model. And I studied it and I really got deep into it and I really liked it. But one thing that sounds maybe funny to you, Mike, and to anybody listening to us, but for me, that whole GROW model really only works for the very first session. And let me tell you why real quick. So the G stands for, what is your big, hairy, audacious goal and what are your sub-goals? Then the R stands for, what is your current reality? You know, how does your life, your work, and everything look like in relation to that goal? Then the O for grow stands for, what are the obstacles and opportunities that you are facing? And the W is a little bit of a stretch. That stands basically for, what actions will you take to change your current reality? And that's a beautiful conversation if you and I or anybody listening would have that. And then maybe you say, okay, I will go home and sit down with my partner and think about in which location do we want to invest. And then grow ends. And I said, well, that sucks because I want to talk more than once with people. So we need to have something else. So Mike comes back 2 weeks later and said, let's have our second session in the Ideal Wealth Grower system. And I asked you first thing, hey, Mike, what was your experience when you actually started looking at which locations you want to contemplate and go after? And you will tell me your experience, which, by the way, is the E. So we are grow E. And then I will ask you, after you describe that, so now that you have narrowed down where you want to invest, what is the result? Do you want to go with Ohio? Do you want to go with Florida? Whatever it is. So you pick something. That's the result. And then I would ask you, which is, by the way, the R, the second R for grower, how does that result impact your goals? Quick example. Let's say you had originally thought, I want to try to invest somewhere in New York or New Jersey. And you find out you would have to run around with $100,000 to $200,000 down payment. And then you do some research and you find out you can actually find a pretty nice investment property for $200,000 in Ohio. Now you have the option to say, if I really had 200,000, I could buy that thing for cash. Or you could say, okay, if I do have 200,000 and that's what one property costs in Ohio, I could actually get 5 for that. So instead of starting with one property, you could start with 5 properties for the same amount of money. Now, obviously, from your goal to, for example, have a certain passive income portfolio, if you can buy 5 right away, the time that you originally thought it would take to get a good portfolio, which was your goal, assuming we're just making it up, would be much, much shorter, right? So now this thing becomes a cycle. And that's what happens. You ask me what is actually going on when you're doing your mentoring and coaching in the community. That's what we're doing, right? Like we're looking at where are you right now? What do you have? What do you want to accomplish? And then we go session by session through the cycle and work our way to the goal. And just to finish up on this, 2 main things is what we're doing in the program. Number 1 is to find properties for you that perform really well in the locations that you like. And the second thing that's very important for me, and if you like, we can talk a little more about it, is I am a very big advocate that you should separate your private stuff from your business stuff, even if you're an employee. So I advocate that anybody who comes in our program sets up a business for the purpose of investment. And that business then collects the rents and pays the mortgages and stuff like that. And if you buy that $200,000 house, you put it in a little LLC that is managed by that business. And you buy the second one, the same, third one, and so forth. So you ultimately build a structure that protects you, but it's also separated from your private stuff. So those are the 2 main things: learning and helping each other to invest, and build a security structure that saves you from lawsuits, but also allows you ultimately to put it all in a trust if you ever want to give it to the next generation.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. This is all pretty cool. I have certainly seen plenty of people who have done these turnkeys, and I've done enough of them myself. Of course, it's a business, and the fact that you are helping folks set up a business structure is very important. For one, for asset protection; two, for a number of other reasons. Obviously, accounting, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I completely understand, and the coaching, the explanation of what ideal stands for and growth stands for makes a lot of sense. People need a little bit. Everyone at every level could use a coach. This is the truth.
Right.
Even
Right.
the greatest, most successful players in the world, whatever sport they're in, even investing, they all have a coach. I've gone through coaches myself, so I have to say that I think it's important for everyone to have a coach at every stage of their journey. So all that makes a lot of sense. I appreciate you sharing. And um, you mentioned some really basic and really cool and fundamental benefits. I mean, I'm a big proponent of real estate. Real estate is the most tax advantaged asset class in the United States. It's got all the things that you mentioned. You got the leverage of bank financing, amortization, appreciation, depreciation, and now bonus 100% is back. So if you wanted to run a cost seg on your rental portfolio, you could. You obviously, cost segregation is used quite a bit on commercial properties, but you can do it with the residential too. I even spoke with cost segregation experts. They have methodology how they can do it kind of on paper without going to every property. So anyway, let's continue the discussion. So that's really cool. Obviously, you invest a little bit internationally. I'm just curious. You sticking with residential because it's very easy to understand, or you sticking with residential for any other reason? Have you looked into commercial real estate? I personally evolved over the years from residential and turnkeys, having portfolios of turnkeys, to commercial because of the complexity of managing many assets. In commercial property, you can have 200 doors, right? And just using an example. And if you want to do 200 turnkey houses, that's a large portfolio of assets to manage. And even you can manage the manager, but you still have to manage that 200 assets per se. Just curious, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, a couple of thoughts. One is I believe very strongly in the turnkey model, partially for the reason that you just brought up. I'm also a big fan of what I call building clusters, which basically means, okay, let's say like we started our conversation and you decide, okay, my first state that I want to invest in is Ohio. And then you pick a metropolitan area. You can say, I want to go Cleveland or Columbus or Dayton or Cincinnati or Toledo, whatever area you pick. And then my next step and suggestion for anybody listening would be to say, okay, let's build a cluster and let's determine how big should a cluster be. And in my opinion, it's always anything between 3 and 8 properties. And you can obviously have more if you want, but just to make an example. So when you scale, and let's just say for an easy calculation, you were to say, I go up to 10 per cluster and I build 10 clusters, so I have 100 properties. If I take my own example, I speak to my property managers who manage literally these clusters for me every month for anywhere between 30 to 45 minutes. So if I had 10, I would literally, let's be generous and say it's an hour for each, which they would get bored if I talk to them for an hour. But just for the sake of argument, I would literally on a 100-unit portfolio spend 10 hours a month. And I personally think this is absolutely acceptable to do that. And if you schedule it out, you could literally say, okay, I do 2.5 hours a week or something like that. Now, if you had 100 units, even if they're not performing very well, you're talking like significant 5-figure passive income. That's when all 100 are financed. They still have plenty of years to go. You're still like $20,000, $25,000, $30,000 income a month. For that, I think you can do 10 hours of work, right? That's a pretty good hourly rate just from that perspective. But it really only works when the turnkey providers manage your cluster or manage your properties and you have a trusting relationship. There's one little twist that I want to give for the audience. For our community, So I'm typically the first person who has one or more properties with a provider. But when I bring our clients in, a provider can rather quickly go to 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 properties. And so we as a community become a relatively strong and valuable client, right? And so what they're basically going to do is if something goes wrong, they're much more likely to help us out or do something or fix something than if you have one house here and one house there and one house there. So that's one thing. The other one, to answer your question, why have I or has our community never gone to larger commercial or office buildings and stuff? And please, you did this and you're probably much smarter than me, but my analogy is what I use is to say, I believe I'm a pretty good electrician and I really don't want to become a really good plumber. And I don't want to really become a pretty good carpenter. That's for me how different it is. The financing is different. The managing is different. The financing is different. The way you calculate what your returns are is different. Everything, all the rules are different. So for me, it's literally like you're learning a different profession. Now, does it help if you have already background in residential when you go to commercial or when you go to office or when you go to storage space or any kind of other exotic stuff? Now, the latest craze is data centers, right? If you want to go real big and data center funds and stuff. To me, each one of those is like a profession within the overall real estate industry. And I just made a decision. I want to be good in this one area. I want to be a really good electrician. And if anybody wants to rather go into plumbing or carpentry or whatever the other things might be called, I'm helping them. I know you. I know a bunch of other people that I would refer them to. Well, I'm just sticking to my electricity stuff.
Yeah, I completely respect this. Don't be a jack of all trades and master of none. So that is an absolutely good truth. I know a number of folks just like you with their own communities, and all they do focus on one strategy. And the turnkey strategy is has been around for a long time, and it's a game of very simple specialization. And if you get very good at that, you can do well. There's no argument. And you are right. It was kind of interesting example that you said. You 10 property cluster. You're speaking for an hour. You have 10 of them, 100 properties. You have basically a monthly. I don't want to call it portfolio management, but you have a monthly portfolio management of 10 hours a month that you have to allocate. Is it a lot? No. Is it completely passive? No. I've had that experience, so I have to say that. It's a function of how good you're going to get. If you're going to get a great property manager, which is very hard to do, right? So my observation over the years, and I'm just giving you my 2 cents, it's neither right or wrong. You may have great property managers. I've seen this is a tough trade to find a great permanent long-term property manager. They're good for a while, and they call it, let's just call it, dating. They're great. They get married, that they get a little bit, laid back. I mean this with all due respect, right?
Yeah.
And your property management starts to sort of, soften up. The other thing that I'm just curious, just questions relevant to what I've seen out there, and I would love to hear your quick comments on these turnkey properties. I've seen two primary issues that besides the work and the time you have to allocate. I see number one, significant need to allocate for repairs, CapEx, tenant moves out. So the cash flow that you actually get, you have to take probably half of it. This is my experience. Maybe more, maybe less, depending on the property, and set aside in the repair bucket. So you might get a 10% yield, but in reality, it's 5% yield because the other 5% has to be for future CapEx. When the roof goes, I remember I had a property that I've owned for over 5 years, and I collected great cash flow every month. And when the tenants moved out, I had a call with property management. You need to spend $40,000. What? I want to pull my hair out. I was collecting $1,100 a month, and I have to spend $40,000 to get a new roof, new everything. The tenant just, ran down the property. So that's my first question. The second question, the values have kind of gone up over the years, right? But the rents have not kept up with the value increases. And it depends on the market. Market by market are different. So years ago used to be 1% rule. So if you collected $1,000 a month, you would get $100,000 property. Assuming, again, condition matters a lot, right? You can get $1,000 property, then later you're going to spend all your cash flow fixing it up. So can you still get really good deals? Because today, very hard to get to that ratio unless you go to a lower and lower quality, go smaller and smaller town. Maybe condition is not as good. And a lot of people buy on yield and they buy turnkey. They don't necessarily really comprehend where they wind up getting their portfolio. And I've seen people wind up with these, let's just call them not big cities or not necessarily rural, but smaller town America type of portfolios that they still trying to get the cash flow target, or they wind up getting more expensive property than they don't get the target yield. So I'm just curious on these two topics. Any quick comments?
Yeah, the first thing I would say is there is something that I call the pivot point, and that has to do with the development of the portfolio. Where if you really think of it, and obviously it is hard when you buy a property that is renovated, is not renovated well, and very quickly starts having maintenance issues. So, I don't want to go too deep into what can you do, how deep should your inspections be, how harsh and hard should you be as a negotiator with the seller to make sure that the things that can be found are all fixed and stuff like that. That's kind of like a separate conversation. But assuming you do that well, you typically, and working with turnkey providers is a significant advantage here, because obviously the turnkey provider has an inherent interest, because they're the one who renovate the property, that they don't have to do massive amounts of maintenance, especially when they deal with my community, because we are always insisting on a warranty upon purchase. And the argument is, okay, you just renovated this property, so I'm assuming, and if you say no, then I'm not dealing with you, that you have some pride in your renovation. So that being said, if you have pride in your renovation, that doesn't mean you're perfect. It could mean that there are certain things that you couldn't test, because only when you live in a house can you really turn everything on and see if everything really works. But that's all a given, that's all fine. But for the first 12 months, this thing is occupied. If something is found, you fix it on your dime. That's the warranty that and I know this is only possible, and at least I've never seen it possible when you just go out to any property management company.
By the way, I want to add one comment on this. I have seen this every time with every turnkey provider. You get 1 year warranty. They'll even buy you a policy from a third party warranty company, right? All that is good. And in the first 12 months, experience for most people on these properties are good. The issue happens usually you go after a couple of years. So everything you said is a function of really good review of what are you buying? Are you buying cat in a bag that's going to be good for 1 year, but 2 years down the road, issues start showing up? Even the roof will pass the formal inspection to get financing, but the roof life may not be, as long as you'd like. So everything you said makes a lot of sense. It's just it's a function of very good negotiation and ability to work with these people who will sell you a decent enough property to pass all these inspections and give you the warranty. But then what happens a few years down the road? It's a mental point that I've seen this. And by the way, folks that I bought my properties with, they were really good cats. They did good stuff for years. And ultimately, what's really interesting, I've seen these turnkey providers turn into new construction because the older product has been a little bit more difficult to maintain, and customers they realize after a few years of ownership, the target cash flows didn't exactly materialize. But anyway, continue with your conversation. I just wanted to add one quick comment. It is absolutely true. Right. What you said makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But the other point that I wanted to bring in, and I mentioned what I call the pivot point, and that is, if you look at it not just as I am buying one house, nobody is building a passive income portfolio with one house, right? So the goal is to go on a journey to build a portfolio that ultimately generates a certain amount of cash flow. And so if you look at it that way, yes, with your first house for the first year, you can basically avoid having to do any maintenance money set aside and so forth. but you shouldn't. I'm with you to say you should put it aside. I don't want to go another rabbit hole, but what we do and we recommend is you can either put the money into high yield savings accounts, or you can do bonds, or what we also lately have done is put it into a fractional real estate where you can basically buy tokens. So you basically investing your savings money relatively liquid into something that is also real estate. So don't just have it sitting in a savings account at the bank. But the point is, so let's just say you have that first year and you have step by step started building a property. What happens is you get to a point where you have to ask yourself, how big do I want to let my reserve get? Like mine, for example, personally, for my 10 unit portfolio, I have 25,000 at any given time in reserve. And what that does is basically it has accumulated out of these monthly rental payments, and it's sitting there and it's getting replenished every time there was some sort of a repair thing happening. So that takes this pressure off that you have to take the money out of your normal cash flow that you're also using to pay the mortgage and insurance and all this other stuff. And depending on, I don't want to say luck or not luck, it has something to do also with how well you choose the properties, how well they are inspected and stuff like that. But assuming you're building a good, solid portfolio, all our clients have not really had a problem to get themselves to their pivot point. And somebody says 20,000, 25,000, 30,000. And when you have that, you have a certain level of security when something bigger comes up. And it covers all things. It covers both the vacancy turn, it covers the normal regular maintenance, and it also covers the CapEx. But that's something that we're building on the side. Now, the other thing, and you kind of already mentioned it, it used to be that the difference between a freshly renovated property, if you really renovated it well, and a brand new property was a huge difference in price. And over the years, what has happened is, in my opinion and my observation, that these prices have come closer together, partially because we had this massive run-up after COVID where prices literally exploded for everything that was out there. So yes, you mentioned there is the pivot. I'm not so sure that the pivot is because of the maintenance issues, or if it is just a matter of realizing it is more convenient for a turnkey provider. But what we are doing now, literally, and you kind of took it all the words out of my mouth in a sense, we are looking more and more to buy into what's called BTR projects, build to rent projects. And I have multiple. I have one I give you a few quick examples for your audience. We have one right now for relatively small houses, kind of starter homes, 3-bedroom, 2-bath. They're not mansions, obviously, in Oklahoma for 145,000, brand new build in a community build. We have some between 260 and 350 in Alabama, brand new. And then we have like between 350 and 650 in Dallas, Texas. And each and every one of those examples is where a developer works with a turnkey provider to develop like a community of 200, 300, 400 houses, but not all at once. They start with the first 50 and then the next 50 and the next 50. And you can acquire them as an investor individually. And they're basically the same like turnkey provider properties, with the difference that you have all the new build benefits of insurance and warranties, and the fact that the stuff is literally brand new. And back to your point that you said earlier, if somebody says, okay, I really have a high tax load, like small business owner, or somebody who has a really good income somewhere along the coast or stuff like that, so I want to significantly lower the tax load on a brand new BTR property, it is obviously much easier to do the segregation, right? Because you have literally the bills for everything, what every little thing costs. And because they're building 300 of 3 different kinds or 4 different kinds, they have the bill of goods for everything. So doing a study like that on a BTR project is much, much easier. That doesn't mean that the assessor is not going to go through and check everything and if it's really there, but you also know what it really costs. So those are things that favor more and more build-to-rent properties. But I also have to say, I mean, I've been doing this for a while. I know you have been doing it for a while. It was few and far between that you could say who is actually doing a 150-unit brand new building for the purpose of renting it out to invest and selling it to investors. It may have existed, but I didn't know about it until like probably 4 or 5 years ago for the first time.
Yeah, this is very cool. I appreciate you actually came to the same conclusions that I've seen many other people come. They've gravitated to B2R type of newer product for the reasons of the maintenance on all the product. And it's kind of, it's an evolution. I mean, we've seen this everywhere.
Mike, if I may, there's one other component, and this applies to me personally because I'm one of those boomers that everybody in the media is talking about. And so when I'm thinking about legacy and turning stuff over at some point to my daughter and maybe to my grandson, it obviously makes much more sense. Let's say I have another 20 years and I buy a BTR property today. That's then a 20-year-old house. If I compare that to the early turnkey properties that are bought, they were built in like 1960 or maybe 1970, right? In 20 years from now, that would be like 45. So that is like a 90-year-old house that I would basically turn over to her. So that's another consideration. And you mentioned in the beginning, there is the 1031 exchange that is still there, still alive and kicking, even though it's been called dead many, many times. So, as long as that's there, that's actually my own plan for my own portfolio, step by step, to convert my existing turnkey properties to BTR properties, just so that I can ultimately in the future turn over a reasonably fresh portfolio to my family.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing. It was a great discussion. Refresh, I haven't had a guest like this in a while on a podcast. Years ago, I had absolute experts on this, and then now it's just a good refresher on turnkeys turn into more of a B2R newer product. And you've got the right approach. I have to say that, I mean, you've got this systems and approach, kind of like a good, healthy approach. So how would folks reach out to you? What's the best way to learn from you or be part of your community? What's the easiest way to reach out?
Well, I mentioned earlier that I like to keep what we're doing relatively boutique. That doesn't mean that I don't like new clients. So the best way is to just go to idealwealthgrower.com. And if you get to the website, at the top right-hand corner of the homepage, there's a little button that says Discovery Call. If you click on that, you get directly to my calendar, you book a time. And that's a little bit of this kind of close-knit community. I love to get to know people who are interested in what you and I spoke about, Mike. And if we then find out we like each other, we like the approach, we have, the goals, and maybe evaluate a little bit, going through that grower cycle the first time, where are you and where do you want to go? And if I'm the right person to help you, we figure this out. And otherwise, we just got to know each other. So there is no real sign-up thing or anything. For me, the first thing is let's get to know each other, then we go see where we're going.
Thank you for sharing. Appreciate your wisdom. Thank you for coming on a podcast, and good luck in your journey. It's a great journey of pilot to passive real estate investor. A lot of people have gone through this. It's just and then you're helping others, so it's great. And thank you for your service when you were flying the friendly skies, or whatever it's called, or unfriendly skies. So
yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, over Bosnia they weren't so friendly, but otherwise they were pretty good.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Big Mike Fund Podcast. To receive your copy of Mike's How to Choose a Smart Real Estate Fund book, head to BigMikeFund.com or visit Amazon and type Mike Zlotnik. Keep listening and keep investing Big Mike style. See you on the next episode.